and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello, and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And we have Alejandro Rojas coming up in just a minute with UFO updates. Our guest this evening is Paul Eno, Behind the Paranormal. You're going to find this a fascinating show. And I want to tell you, if you are supporting the show, I want to make sure that you know I really appreciate it. If you're not able to support the show and you want to listen to the entire show, you can always listen to podcastufo.com every Wednesday evening from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or in the Dark Matter Digital Network the following night, Thursday, as a podcast. But you can listen to the full show there from 10 to midnight. And that's it for me. How you doing, Alejandro?
Good. How you doing?
Pretty good. Sounds like we're both doing work on our homes. You're doing tile work and stuff?
Well, next week I will have some tile being corrected in my home because they screwed it up and installed it kind of crappily.
Well, that's never good when you have to correct something.
Crappalicious. Yeah, so it's going to take 2 days, so I'll have to work from home, and it might be I might be on live with you from Casa Rojas.
Oh, I hope so. Casa Rojas. Mm-hmm. Rojas, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we got going on for UFOs this week?
Well, I am at the beach in San Diego. In fact, I'm about to upload some pictures I took from the beach. But, so I haven't been working.
Oh,
but
you're still there.
Yeah. But
All
I
right.
was working before I left, and there are a couple interesting stories. So, for instance, this witness at Revere in Massachusetts had seen a star-like UFO about the size of a basketball moving along treetop level. So that's kind of interesting. They drew a picture or like kind of object. It's kind of a painting. I don't know who did this, but they did kind of an online painting. So it's a very nice piece of work done here showing. But this person said they looked out their window and they saw this white and gray angular object flying silently. This was May 26th of this year at 10:30 a.m. So kind of weird. This is a real weird one. They went and grabbed their camera, but weren't able there weren't any submitted with the sighting. They said the object was moving really quickly, and they were a little nervous about even taking a picture because they were nervous of what their neighbors would think. But unfortunately, yeah, this is kind of an interesting sighting. I guess these sightings where they come with nice graphics are always fun.
Yeah, I saw that on your website. So that's weird, a star-like object, size of a basketball, going along the treetops. Pretty strange.
I mean, again, it's just anecdotal information, but if it was moving along the treetops like they're saying, I mean, that's really interesting. Now, there was another sighting in Chandler, Arizona, and I don't know if you and I talked about that. I don't think we had. There was another one where we couldn't really make heads or tail. We weren't sure if it was military flares, but that was in a different direction. So this is in Chandler. These are some lights in the sky that they said they saw appear and disappear several times throughout the night. This was at from 9:15 to 9:22 p.m. on August 19th. There's a video, but these videos, it's just unfortunate when they're just kind of a light in the sky. It's difficult to say, and they do appear and disappear. However, someone else in YouTube suggested what I think they might be is, when planes are turning, their lights for a period of time are directed at you during that course of a turn. And then they get directed, towards the airport or wherever they're going. So you see this bright light, really bright, and then it fades out. And, throughout my career looking into UFOs, I've seen other people report this sort of thing. And I have a feeling that that's what this is. So we'll see. People can take a look at this and see what they think. And the thing is some people say, well, wouldn't that happen at the same place every day? And not necessarily, especially a big airport like Sky Harbor in Phoenix. They have different strips, landing strips, and they change them occasionally depending on where the wind is and stuff.
That's right.
And, the routine of where they fly in changes depending on conditions and things. So it's not always in the same place at the same time. So that's what this could be, but people can take a look and see what they think for themselves.
That's right. Yep, something that people don't think of often, and yes, the landing and taking off of aircraft does have a lot to do with wind direction.
Yeah. Otherwise, we have an interesting story from Micah Hanks on our website about unidentified objects in Earth orbit, including the fabled Black Knight. So Micah gives some information there, and it was courtesy of Jim Harold, because Jim Harold had this written for his website. He does a paranormal podcast by Micah, but it was a great article. So I was talking with Micah, and I asked if I could repost it, and Jim Harold did allow me to post a portion as long as I linked back to the full article. So I think it's a great article. People can take a look at it. And last week, you and I had talked about that possible signal from space.
Oh, yes.
And so I looked more into that, and I wrote an in-depth story so people can get more about that. But essentially, it was captured by the Russians a year ago. It was they had directed this really weird, huge kind of array. It's like this circular wall. I've got some pictures of it that is a large telescope. It's really interesting. It's called the Raton 600 radio telescope, so people can take a look at it. So it's a really weird, this Russian telescope. But anyways, that's what they captured it with. Essentially, they kind of talked to some people about this signal, but they had they had to listen to this area 36 times, and only once did they capture the signal. There was a little bit of confusion because later on the Russians said, well, we never said it was alien. We just said it was a strong signal. But they said, and I think there was a mix-up, and I think even Seth Shostak got mixed up. They said, in the past, during the Soviet era, we got a signal, and then we found out it was a Russian military satellite we didn't know was there. Mm-hmm. And Shostak was like, well, this signal, this new one in May, couldn't have been a Soviet defense satellite, but which, of course, it wasn't, because the Soviets, that was a long time ago, and this was captured last year. So I think he got confused. I think they were giving an example. Turned out to be something man-made, and they thought this time most likely it's something man-made as well. So, and most people agree. Nobody said it was alien, but the reason the media picked up on it and started calling it alien, essentially, or possibly alien, is because SETI decided to also monitor that area to see if they could confirm that signal exists, and they were not able to. So,
yeah, well, that's good that they actually do that. I heard someone recently talk about this signal and said that it was definitely alien because it had harmonics. It still would be nice to know exactly where it was originating from, and if it ever will be replicated.
Well, and the thing is Shostak, of course, they think about this a lot, and he makes a lot of really good points. First of all, he talks about the level of power, energy it would take to send the signal. He was like, if they're sending a signal just out broadcasting in general so anybody could capture it, that would take essentially all the energy of Earth combined.
Wow.
If they're sending it directly, just pinpoint directly at us, that would take all of the energy that we can, that humanity can muster at this point in our civilization. So it's still a very large amount. And to send, one little signal to us, that's a big effort for something that would be, you would think if they were going to send us a signal, they would have it a constant signal for a period of time so we could pick it up again and listen to it.
Well, then again, these are all the conventional ways that we know about it. And another thing I think about as well is then how come people like Hawking is concerned about us broadcasting, playing radio and television signals that we're playing with poison because we may attract alien species out there that aren't, that are going to come destroy us or something like that. If it takes all that energy, we're obviously not pumping a lot of energy into our signals, just enough so we can hear them. Will they still travel and still be detected for light years away?
Yeah, that's a good point. Shostak talks about that because he talks about the controversy with METI, which is sending messages to space. And there's an astronomer, Paul Davies, I've interviewed to talk about that because he's part of SETI and he's more into that kind of idea. And Hawking's daughter has been involved with this, even though Stephen Hawking feels like this is a terrible idea. But Shostak makes the point that SETI doesn't do that. SETI listens. He has not been involved with any METI projects. However, he notes that even though people like Stephen Hawking are concerned, it's too late because we're already emanating signals, so we're not quiet at all. We are sending out lots of different signs that there's life, abundant on this planet. So in order to hide that, it's kind of like a little too late. So true, our signals aren't as strong. I don't remember the entire science behind it, but so it takes a long time for them to travel out, and they're weak enough where they somewhat diminish. So I don't know how strong they would be or how difficult it would be to pick them up. But there was a story recently that we posted in our headlines where scientists were talking about how to cloak ourselves, how to make it so nobody knows that we're here. But, of course, some people have argued, well, it's a little too late for that.
Not only that, if we were being examined from afar, they could just check our atmosphere and see that we are definitely active.
Yeah.
And
we'd have to,
life and all that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know what it would take. It'd maybe like Bugs Bunny, we would need like a big poster board that goes all the way around the planet that shows like Mars or type planet. Nothing here.
Nothing here. A big arrow pointing somewhere else.
Yeah. Aliens here. Big arrow pointing to Mars or something. And
yeah. All right. Well, hey, thanks so much.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. And we'll be talking to you next week.
All right. Talk to you later, dude.
All righty. And hang in there, everyone. Right after the quick music break, we'll be right back with Paul Eno. Hey, Paul, how you doing? Welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you very much, Martin.
Yeah, I'm trying to, I think it was back in 2014, the last time you were on. So being that long ago, we have a lot of new listeners since then. Can you kind of give you a quick little snapshot of your background, and I know the story about you being kicked out of seminary was pretty interesting. But I'd like to hear that and how you got into the paranormal in general.
Well, just briefly, and it took me a long time to talk about this, as you can imagine, I, at the age of 7, witnessed my father's suicide. And I was in a very strict Roman Catholic school at the time, and, with the Sisters of Mercy, so-called, and if you ate a hot dog on Friday or did things like commit suicide, you went to hell. Now, this is a wonderful man, and fortunately, I had the Sisters of Mercy, God bless them, but at the time, they were either saints or potential axe murderers. And fortunately, I had one of the saints who pretty much second grade, pretty much told me, well, God is kind of bigger than all that, got me through it.
Thank God.
So all those years, precisely, all those years, what happened to my father? It was in the back of my mind. Finally, at the age of 14, I entered the seminary, back when you could still do that at that age. And I began to wonder, as the years went by the time I finished, I was 17 or 18, I was wondering, well, maybe these ghosts that you hear about in every culture throughout history are souls in purgatory. Oh. And for that's a rather eccentric Roman Catholic doctrine that if you're not good enough to go to heaven, you're not quite bad enough to go to hell, you go to this purgative state, hence the name, where you are purged or purified until you're ready to go to heaven. Okay, that's sort of the the need to pigeonhole everything for our narrow Western paradigm. Yeah. So that was the theory that got me started. And the first case that I started on was in 1970 and 1971 in an abandoned village in Connecticut. I'd heard it was quote unquote haunted, and I went there with several different trips, all with other seminary students and with a photo expert who was brought along because he didn't believe any of this, and the rest is rather quite remarkable. I write about that at length elsewhere, but these people, I didn't think of them as ghosts, showed no sign whatsoever of being dead, never mind being in purgatory, so that changed everything. So that's how I got started, pretty much. And then by 1977, I was about a year or two away from ordination. I had left the Roman Catholic Church and joined the Orthodox Church, and I happened to be at the right point to continue in their seminary. But they were not very supportive of this. I should have my nose in my books, and I was a recent convert and should, concentrate on my studies, which I was doing. I did pretty well. But come 77, I was out the door. They didn't even want to talk to me because I was involved with Ed and Lorraine Warren at the time, and they were not exactly the most popular people among certain religious circles. So that's essentially how it got started. And I ended up, oddly enough, a journalist because the only other thing I knew how to do was write, and I became only one news. I published a few things in religious newspapers, and only one newspaper in New England wanted to talk to me. That was in Rhode Island. That's how I got here. So I became a reporter, and it took, and then I ended up an editor at the Providence Journal. And I've had a wonderful career in journalism. Now I am I guess you might call me a trade journalist. I write about three things: the paranormal, construction, residential construction, and history. So if you are an overregulated contractor working on a historic haunted house in New England, I'm your guy.
Pretty good. Hey, someone just put on the message board that to tell you that you did a great job at Exeter. And the Exeter UFO Festival, I don't know how that dropped off my radar. I usually go to that and usually see you there.
We're getting old, Martin.
Yeah, I guess so. When was that?
Just this past weekend.
Oh, my gosh.
And you could have been involved in our live. We broadcast live we did it once on CBS, but on this Boston Providence station that we're on now, we've never done it before. And my son Ben, my partner in the paranormal and my co-host, pulled it all together. He's also a trained engineer and sound guy. And we had including Travis Walton, who was a surprise visitor to the festival, Kathleen Marden, Richard Dolan, and Denise Stoner, and a number of other headliners were there. And we had a live show with a live audience who the speakers got a kick out of it because I arranged it so that we could communicate with the audience by means of the projection screen. So we had all the rules, like no swearing. This is an FCC regulated broadcast and all this. And then when I pushed the button, and in big red letters, applause would come on, and they thought that was good. They all started to applaud. And Peter Robbins said, "Oh, that's how you do it. We're gonna have to do that at our lectures. Just get the applause sign." So we had a great time and covered a lot of subjects, questions from the audience, and it was really great.
Wow.
There were a few production glitches on the timing because I was going by a clock that was 5 minutes fast. But anyway, what do you want for nothing? Huh?
Yeah. Well, I'm really sorry I missed it. Really, I can't even believe it.
But I thank the listener for commenting on that.
Just fell through. Someone wanted to know he was interested to know if your belief in religion has been challenged by the paranormal. That's a deep question to start right off.
Yeah, it is. I like deep. I like deep, deep end. I must say that in a way it has enhanced it. I think that it's funny because the irony is that the Orthodox, whom I will always respect the churches because that's where I learned to love God. It may not be the God I learned about maybe even not in the seminary. But nevertheless, it's been an enhancing experience. I'll tell you why. Actually, the entire experience of working in the paranormal, right from that day one in that lost settlement in Connecticut in 1970, kind of made me wonder about the old ideas about what this stuff is about. Both in the paranormal, both in the quote-unquote ghost realm and in the realm of UFOs, because as the years went by, UFOs kept cropping up in what should have been just haunted houses and stuff. Ghost cases kept leading to UFOs, which leads to my current goofy theories. So I would always think that perhaps maybe these are ways to explain things that are maybe have been forgotten somewhat, or at least buried under the baggage of centuries in some religions. A lot of the Orthodox, ironically, clergy and people are fans of our show because they say, well, gee, this multiple worlds interpretation that Ben and I use to explain our paranormal experiences could also explain miracles and other things that are kind of there in the most ancient doctrines, not just of Christianity, but of the shamans and Zoroastrianism and many of the very ancient beliefs upon which modern civilization is built, including some of the ancient Babylonian ideas and this kind of thing. I don't believe all religions are the same because I don't think they worship the same things sometimes, but there is a grain of commonality that goes way back. And think of it, Martin. If there had been nothing to explain, if there had been no mysteries, if people had not been curious about everything, watching their relatives die, why does that happen? What are the stars, this sort of thing. If that curiosity had not been there, then there would be no science and there would be no religion. So in a way, and then if they did not feel that they were in touch with supernatural beings of some kind in some places, there would have been none either. And I think really the paranormal, mysterious experiences, things that cannot be explained, really is the mother of both science and religion, which really until recent centuries have not been at odds in most cases. I think the whole religion versus science thing is a myth in many ways, until very recently in some circles. So I think that the religious aspect of it can be enhanced by one's belief as long as one is not a prisoner of doctrine that has lost its origins.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, I maintain a rule of prayer. I maintain a discipline that way, and I think that one gradually moves, particularly with this multiverse awareness, as Ben and I call it, the awareness of many different worlds and many versions of ourselves and all this business. You can grow, I hope, I'd like to think, spiritually, and begin to kind of see over the top of the wall, so to speak.
Wow. That is really interesting. I want to get into your theory of all this in a little bit here. But one of the things I think of also in the mix is as far as what we can, our senses can actually detect, and I'm talking about vision, hearing, feeling, all that. It's not everything. So there are some things that can be going on that we can't even detect. And a lot of times I wonder if something like ghosts and things like that have to do with a small period of time where we can actually detect something, or sort of like in dimensions where you can like something comes in and out. You do hear about a lot of times when people will say they have a UFO sighting and they're looking right at the craft that looks like a craft, and all of a sudden it vanishes and then it comes back, and things like that. But
yes, or certain people in a group seeing the object and others not.
Yeah,
I find very interesting. Yeah,
and I've heard you talk about like people seeing villages one day that are not there the next day.
Sure.
Well, go ahead.
Well, this is one of the things that assisted me in questioning some of the original ideas about this stuff. Now our general assumptions, which are rather narrow, based upon our own physical, limited physical perception, as you just mentioned, the five senses, are really not good enough to really explain many of these things. And so when I ran into not only this lost village, as it was called, with these people seeming to go about their business in another time, another place, complete with farm animals, farm implements banging together, and things of this kind. Are these spirits of the dead? I mean, we assume that quote-unquote ghosts are spirits of the dead. I mean, what else would they be, right? Especially if it's someone you know. Uncle Bob comes, skipping down the hallway 3 years after his funeral. I mean, it's some remnant of Uncle Bob, even though he's wearing clothes and has physical characteristics. At the same time, UFOs, we assume, are craft from other planets. Now, that idea is expanding now to include some other alternatives, but essentially, nuts and bolts craft from other planets. We assume that Bigfoot and Loch Ness, all these things, are just really good at playing peekaboo, really, really hard to find. That's an assumption. And I don't think we can assume anything. That's why the motto of our show is everything you know is wrong. And our publisher liked that so much. Ben and I wrote a book together. It's based on our radio scripts from 2008 on. It's coming out from Schiffer in January. And we had called it Cosmic Journey, Behind the Paranormal. Publisher says, no way. You got to use the title of the show, and the everything you know is wrong. He said that really is great. So that's the title of the book. But, so what is it that's wrong? I think our entire notion of history, certainly theology, certainly the paranormal, our understanding of ourselves as islands, isolated from one another in just about every way, and not considering the non-locality of memory, thought, imagination, etc. And all these things are wrong, everything we've been taught. So what do? I guess you do the best you can, and you sort of start with what Aristotle would call the tabula rasa, the empty slate, and you write upon it as you learn or think you learn things. But we are at a certain handicap, because our science is based on essentially scientific materialism. In other words, everything is matter and is energy too, but that's all the interaction of matter with other matter. And I think that is totally blown out of the water by quantum mechanics. And I have many friends who are scientists whom I respect, but they don't talk to each other. I have a very dear friend who's a behavioral scientist. And she was unaware of quantum effects and the non-locality of consciousness, things that physicists of consciousness are talking about. And the sciences, they just don't talk to each other in the West and pretty much anywhere else now. So I think we're pretty much starting from scratch on these things. And I think this multiverse idea pretty much explains everything, at least from our point of view. It could be wrong. We're the first ones to admit. Maybe they are spirits of the dead. Maybe they are craft from other planets, at least in some cases. But I don't think the laws of physics, at least as far as dead people are concerned, really hold up in this realm in which we find ourselves. And that's one of the key understandings of many approaches to the multiple worlds interpretation of quantum physics, that each of these worlds does or have a very different, has to have different laws of physics. Which, of course, explains why I watched refrigerators float around in the presence of police officers and things of that kind in, I'm thinking, one case, 1974. So I think it explains the paranormal pretty much from that point of view.
Wow. Wow. When I was doing the news, which I had to pre-record with Alejandro, because next week we're doing it live, but he couldn't do it live this week. You wanted to comment on something. Do you remember what that was?
Oh, no, I didn't realize it was pre-recorded, and I know Alejandro, so I just...
you just wanted to say hi?
Oh, no. Actually,
okay.
I have a brand new UFO report from New Hampshire. The gods seem determined to keep me in New Hampshire, and I have no objection to that. This is I don't know if you know my colleague Shane Searway.
Nope.
He is a very, very feet-on-the-ground paranormal investigator, pretty much ghosts and parasites. And he also was a Blackfoot shaman. Very, very discerning thinker. It's a good combination. One of the few investigators with whom Ben and I will work. So he submitted a report that came in. This occurred last night, apparently, and I'll read his email. I spoke to somebody I've known a long time this morning who witnessed a UFO in Jaffrey, New Hampshire. Now, that's kind of in the middle of southern New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you know where it is, Mark. Mm-hmm. But it's right near Mount Monadnock, which has some interesting stories and all this. Anyway, this is to continue. Last night around 2 a.m. while walking the dog, be the day I walked the dog at that hour, they said it was massive and very bright, all white light. It was stationary and would sometimes move slowly and stop again. It was completely silent. All of a sudden, the light went out. They could still see the dark silhouette. It tilted and then emitted sparkles and then shot off rapidly. The source is credible and not into this stuff. And if Shane submits the report, that's good enough for me. But this is a friend of his, and I thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
since
that's a good one.
Dealing with the UFO news.
Yeah, I like that.
So that's all I wanted to mention. And it's funny because, as I say, we're just at the UFO conference in Exeter, New Hampshire, not that far from there over the weekend.
Right.
So I jokingly said, well, I know who that is. They dropped into the festival, and they had to phone home in Jaffrey to tell them they'd be late or some dumb joke like that.
Yeah, parked around the corner. Yeah, someone on the message boards thinks you should run for president, and I actually think that's better than the alternatives. But we never want to get into politics here.
Well, our mayor here was in northern Rhode Island, Woonsocket, Rhode Island, was bound and determined I was going to run for city council, and she pigeonholed me at a conference, not a paranormal conference, and I said, I'll have to talk to my wife. I just don't really have the time. And I said, you do realize that I have the paranormal show on that station? And she said, oh, yeah, I know. I listen sometime. I said, look, the city council's so strange now, nobody think anything of it. But in any case, I decided not to do it. And then the station manager says I couldn't do the show. At least, Ben would have to do it by himself if I ran for office. So anyway.
Speaking of your show, just to let someone know how they can catch it. You had me on there a while back. That was fun.
Sure.
Yeah.
And will again. Yes, it's called Behind the Paranormal, and with Paul and Ben Eno, and it's on WOON 1240 AM station in Boston Providence, Worcester Market. And it's Sundays live, Sundays noon to 1 p.m. Eastern time. And there are also 620 or so free recorded shows if you have the time, and podcasts at behindtheparanormal.com. And you can just look for the link there, and there's information and that sort of thing, and what we're doing, and events, and all that sort of thing. So it's people tend to like it. It's only an hour long, but as I say, our first live broadcast is up there in a recorded form from Sunday.
Now, can someone listen to it live on the internet as well?
Yes, actually, at onworldwide.com. That's the station site, and you hit the ON TV icon. You can hear it, and also have the jarring experience of actually seeing us in the studio. They have a webcam he insists on putting on us. And also, if any device, and we had a lot of our British listeners were irate because they couldn't get the live show, which now is 5 p.m. their time. It's perfect. It's the Simple Radio app by Streema, Streema, and that seems to work all over the world, and we've had a lot of people saying good things about it. And you just do a search on WOON in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, and that'll come up. But it has to be live, because if there's no live programming on the station, I found that they play the the station ID like forever. And Shane and I were coming back from a new case in Pennsylvania that involves some UFOs and other things, and listening to the show because Ben was on by himself with a guest, and I'm very paternal that way. I have to listen. So we're on the highway in Pennsylvania, and all I heard was 18 station IDs, and then finally Ben came on. So I found out that there's a recorded show before that. So anyway, that's the station, and that's the way to get it.
Wow. Okay, and then when we get into the second hour, I want to talk about your stead over at the Rendlesham Forest and a little bit about that. We'll bring that up. I know we talked about that before, but that's pretty interesting. So how do you think, going back to what you were kind of insinuating a few minutes ago, how do you think these things are all connected? I'm talking about I think UFOs. Let's throw it all out there. Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts, paranormal in general.
Well, pretty much forever, everyone has assumed these things are not connected. There were people who investigated UFOs, people who investigated ghosts, and people who investigated cryptids, and, of course, they would never meet. As a matter of fact, a lot of the ghost people would never use psychics. I mean, I don't either, but, they wouldn't really – they were different realms. However, I think in the past 10 years or so, I don't know, I think people perhaps are seeing what we're seeing. There seems to be more of a realization that perhaps the same process lies behind all these various phenomena. For example, and this is funny. I mean, Ben, I always thought is a very special kid, not just because he's my son, but because he has these amazing insights. It was, oh my goodness, back in I think it was 2000. I had received a call from the owner of an herb farm in Connecticut. I don't think Ashwillet Herbs. I don't think it exists anymore. But she said, you really have to come over here and see this. And it wasn't anything particularly scary. Just all sorts of things were going on. Now, she didn't tell me what it was at first because I usually insist on that. I don't like to know what's going on. I like to see for myself. So Ben and but it was very benign. So Ben and two of his friends came with me. He was only 9. And, I never would have brought him anywhere if I thought it was anything serious. So we get in there, and Ben said, there are going to be UFOs involved in this case. I said, what? Ben, I mean, I've been running into this sort of thing, but I've never told you that. How did you know? So sure enough, we get there, and there was a mysterious disappearing man with red hair who would sometimes talk with people who were there. There were statues that were allegedly moving. There were UFOs and various ghostly type phenomena as well, and other things that probably don't have any labels that we run into frequently in these so-called flat areas that we investigate now. One of the rather benign phenomena that were occurring there was an energy point, I guess, if you might say, or vortex, or whatever terms you want to use. There was some sort of geomagnetic energy coming out of the ground that was rather helpful to people's health. The owners had built a tower around it as part of another building, and you could go stand in this center. And I have pictures of Ben standing there. I myself had some rather alarming internal bleeding, and I stood there, and it never happened again.
Wow. And
it's funny. I wanted to thank whoever was doing this. Didn't want to be thanked. Just wanted to give. There did seem to be a personal being of some kind. I mean, I don't know. It maybe whatever puny terms we use are never good enough. So just kind of have the experience. So all this sort of stuff happening in one place. We would once you started to look for it. This is when these things turned up. Another case, 1998, here in Rhode Island. There was what I had long ago come to refer to as a parasite. I think our folklore considers them demons or evil spirits, but I believe they're life forms, perfectly physical, because I've had physical confrontations with them that feed upon what can only be described, I guess, as the negative energy that we produce when we are divided in any way or at odds or whatever. It sounds goofy, but that seems to be exactly what happens. There was that, and then but when I went outside the house, there were other things going on. There was a spike in UFO activity in the area, and I began to find that other houses, when you could talk to the neighbors, were also having problems. That's why I like neighborhoods where the neighbors are friends, because you can talk to them. I find that it's never. We began to find that it was never limited to one family, one house. There was always of one size or another, a flap of some kind going on. Sometimes these would extend for up to 200 square miles. Now, the problem is that and we'd find sometimes that the most powerful phenomena would occur actually in a triangle somehow, strangely enough. You know? And the only question that arises, and that did arise then, was what are we being arbitrary here in our setting out of the geographical area? In other words, where do you decide that whatever's feeding on the and I believe the whole thing is caused by parallel world intersects in this triangle, and the energy, the overwash or the overlap spreads out to a point where all these things can be happening. You know, well, how do you tell where that ends? Because as John Keel said, the entire planet is haunted. So by the time we got to 2005 and Ben started working with me at the age of 13, we were called into a house in Torrington, Connecticut. And William J. Hall has since written a book about this called the Haunted House Diaries. But again, it's only a beginning. And we went in there, and they were seeing things. This is just in this house, the 1793 farmhouse, and the people same family had lived there since shortly after. There had been a general store and this sort of thing, but then family moved in, and 6 generations had lived there and still do. In the course of 10 years of investigating the place, I found out they were distant cousins, so that was rather pleasant. The first things we heard were things like this: strange, boxy entities bouncing by the window, legs hanging from the ceiling, walking as though on a surface that did not exist in our world. Ben and I sat on our first visit, this is in August of 2005, sat there at the dining room table, and you could feel people walking behind you. The place was full of people you couldn't see. In the basement of the house, where the great grandparents of the current owner had lived in sort of an apartment, were what she thought were 2 ghosts. It turned out, and this is a long story, it turned out that they were seeing us as we saw them. They were going about their lives perfectly physically in a parallel reality where they had not died, or where it was to us the past, and that they were seeing her, their great-granddaughter, as a ghost. And we had to work with them to convince them it's not a ghost, you know, and then, you know, maybe you can separate the worlds or something, and then you don't have any more or trouble. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But what I believe is essentially going on is that all sorts of worlds, with all sorts of different physical laws, were converging pretty much within that triangle, of which that house was one point. Okay, and there were UFOs were being seen. And then here's where it really gets interesting. All of a sudden in 2009 and 2010, the military shows up. All right. And the question is, well, what has it got to do with this? Well, I think it has a lot to do with it, because point number 2 of the triangle was the center of the military activity. This was a farm where there was no farming. It was very dilapidated when I saw it in 2010. As a matter of fact, we were with a film crew that was doing a pilot for a proposed show with Ben and I. That never works because the networks come back and say in so many words we're too intelligent. And so this farm, all of a sudden, by 2013, the building, 2012, the buildings, the barns had been torn down. The 2 silos remained, and the area was completely smoothed out. Thousands of square feet of where the barn had been. There were vehicles coming and going. There was all kinds of strange air activity, including black helicopters. And then in 2013, a huge metal sheet, thousands of square feet, that could only be seen from the air, shows up where this barn had been. Obviously, there had been excavation around the edges of this. There was excavation going on until last year, as a matter of fact. The military activity ceased, and there's some evidence of ventilation shafts, and there's something going on at this place. At one lecture, one of Shane's lectures, Shane Searway's lectures, a man came up to him in New Hampshire and said that he couldn't believe the pictures that Shane had shown that we had taken of this farm. And he said he himself had been a radio technician for a private company and had installed all sorts of very strange radio equipment at this facility. at this farm, and he wasn't told what it was. And then just 2 years ago, we were told, and of course a new barn has been built in the meantime. I don't think the doors that look like they've ever been opened, and there's nothing in there. So this fellow had installed this radio equipment, and then I'm former military myself. I've done just about everything at least once. And after I was in the seminary, I can't talk about a lot of that. But in any case, I was still had a few contacts in the intelligence community, and I asked one of them, "Can you track down this address of this farm?" And he said, "You need to back off that address," which in other words, we're right that something fluky is going on. So what we do is our show has a network of reporters. And I sort of turn them into a spy network when you're trying to cover something of this scope. Right now, we're working on a place in Utah. That's for a future show. But now, if possible, they don't know each other, this sort of thing. But the reports we're getting are really strange. There are changes in public behavior reported in this case. So, but anyway, to get back to the point of the question, I think you've got a place of vast numbers at times, world intersects. And in one world, you've got maybe Bigfoot who comes and goes. That's what the Native Americans will tell you that Bigfoot does. You have UFOs who come and go and perhaps use these worlds as a means of travel, which would, of course, eliminate all the engineering and mechanical issues involved with coming from very far away places. They may be coming from planets that don't even exist in our universe. They may not be coming from other planets at all. They may be coming from other versions of the Earth and all this sort of thing. So this is why I think you see so many of these seemingly unrelated phenomena in these areas where these things are taking place, and they are related. And why is the military interested? Well, Ben has certain abilities that I don't have, and he believes that there was research being conducted there on how to generate energy from world intersects. Other evidence, and he agrees with this too, is that essentially, wouldn't we love to militarize the paranormal? Wouldn't we love to weaponize these world boundaries and be able to manipulate time and space, or seem to? And to work our will in parallel worlds, bring them into ours as shamans do, and make things real that we want to make real. Well, when it comes to shamans who are trying to heal people of cancer, that's one thing. But when it comes to advancing a military or political agenda that may not even be from our government, because I'm not sure that this was the U.S. military doing this. Okay, all this activity. So these are all questions that are up in the air, but I think we cover the gamut from a ghost in a house, or what seems to be a ghost, all the way to an attempt to militarize the paranormal, and that's nothing new. That goes back to the 1950s. But if we've discovered the multiverse idea and are making it work somehow, I think that's really scary, and that may be the reason for the secrecy, or at least some of the secrecy surrounding the UFO phenomenon. I don't think that we would be too upset. I mean, we all grew up, Martin, with the Klingons and the denizens of the planet of the apes. I think we'd be delighted if NASA were to announce, well, sure, there's an Earth-like planet and there's evidence of life there, or SETI has received signals that are intelligent in nature and this sort of thing. I think most of us would be pretty well delighted. Mm-hmm. However, as long as they're out there somewhere, but if all, and this is the thing with quantum mechanics and some of the interpretations of these multiple worlds, all possibilities exist somewhere in concrete reality, all around us in parallel worlds. So if we were to become aware that this was happening with us all around us rather than far away, I think that might be the reason for the secrecy or some of the secrecy. I think that would be the most terrifying concept for most people, that hostile aliens are, just on the other side of the world boundary and maybe have a way of getting in here and getting out of here. Have learned to use that. So maybe that's why we're trying to learn to use it.
Wow. Weaponize the paranormal. That's something I never thought of. A couple of questions came to mind. First of all, is this house you were speaking of where all this activity, you mentioned a triangle, does that have anything to do with the Bridgewater Triangle?
No, that's on the other side of New England. We've done some research there, which I can mention. It's pretty interesting. But just there was the farmhouse in Torrington. A few miles away is the point number 2 of the farm. And so we triangulated where point 3 might be. And it was up to the north of there. And we found it. We had the film crew with us. And Ben pointed. They said, it's in here. So down the hill from the road, across this really weird sort of little field with a brook that came down off a hill, split into 2, went around like a little island, and then joined again, and it almost as though it was man-made, and then headed off into the blue. On this little island were all these stones, and Ben immediately, he doesn't like me talking about this, but he has these trances, and he fell onto the ground, and this lasts for sometimes 4 or 5 minutes, and he began to levitate, and this was all on camera. We have never been allowed to see that footage, and my information through the grapevine was that somebody got to the director, who was a very famous name, and the whole thing was squashed. Now that's happened twice on that case there, and once much more recently. So there was that, and Ben, that was point 3. And Ben said, and there are these white trucks coming and going from up on the road across at what was supposed to be a summer camp. This is in November here. And they're coming in, and Ben says they're looking in the wrong place for point number 3. So if all of this is correct, we may have discussed, probably shouldn't be talking about it on the air, but this, again, the center of this, what has become, we call it the Litchfield Triangle. And we have things like in the lower part of this region, the southern part of this region is Bridgeport, where I had that wild poltergeist thing in 1974. Within the greater area around the triangle was this terrible, massacre at the Sandy Hook School in December of 2012. And you name it, Dudley Town, you name it, it's all around this vicinity. And so that's number one. And now Bridgewater, which refers to Bridgewater, Massachusetts, seems to be centered on this 220 square mile Hockomock Wildlife Management Area. Now, Hockomock is a Wampanoag term that essentially means something like land of the devil. Okay. Now, the natives to this day will tell you that their ancestors would talk about goofy things happening in this area, things that would translate to us as Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts, and all this business. You name it, it happens there. It has happened there. It's, for example, a police officer in the late 70s was sitting in his cruiser, and a Bigfoot supposedly picked up the back of the cruiser and dropped it with him in it. Naturally, he considered retreat the better part of valor. And people can look it up. It's very famous. Giant this, flying that, thunderbirds, humongous snakes, this sort of thing. So how do you investigate an area like that? Well, first of all, I talk to hunters if it's a wilderness area, because they see everything. And many of the strange tracks are the result, we believe, and their opinion is of, I suppose you call them coy dogs or that sort of thing. There are a lot of coyotes in New England, as you know, Martin, and just about everywhere else too. And they interbreed with local domestic dogs, and they produce these coy dogs, as they're called. And they have very odd tracks sometimes and strange habits. On the other hand, you have reports of puckwudgies. Okay, which the natives deny is their term, but I don't know where it came from. But it's supposed to be these little beings that will try to entice you into swamps. I mean, it's right out of European folklore. However, one of our trips there, Ben and I, this is in 2012, right after we returned from England, we had been just cruising through the Freetown State Forest, which is part of this area, and it's very, very sparsely settled. There are ghost reports of a ghostly truck, which I find interesting. How do you have the spirit of a truck? And we were at the head of Watuppa Pond at a little clearing by the dirt road, and we just got out because it was very beautiful there. Well, we felt an intense feeling of being watched. Well, I just snapped some photos, and these are you have to be very careful with photos taken on a sunny day in the woods because there are all sorts of reflections, and digital media will interpret certain images and this kind of thing. However, on two of these frames, there seem to be little beings rather clearly. One of them, the thing is with flesh tones in nature are very rare unless you're dealing with fungi sort of thing. So you really don't get flesh tones in nature. These were, what one seems to be a hooded figure almost like that of a monk, and they were miniature, just among the leaves. And another one was a full figure, again, with the flesh tones. And I know Jimmy Church, I was on his show, and we referred people to the website where these are, and he was flabbergasted. So if it's at behindtheparanormal.com, and I wish I had at the top of my head. I can look it up while we're talking. There are talking points. There is a talking points page for each year of the show, and they're in there, and I'll try to find it as we talk. So interesting. So in any case, they're there. Also, I would refer people to the website NewEnglandGhosts.com. That's probably the best place to find those pictures. There are cases on one tab. You can link to the case page and then find the Freetown, I should say the Bridgewater Triangle, and the pictures are in there. And a lot of other cases that we've done too. So that's again another area.
Yeah, right. Go ahead.
Oh no. So the other thing about this was just after we pulled away from there, we were making the comment that, well, the military hasn't turned up in this area yet, so I wonder what's going on. Sure enough, we turn a corner, middle of nowhere, all woods, dirt road, and there's a line of utility trucks all there with all these guys in sunglasses, military types, watching us go by. So maybe that's there. And, of course, black helicopters have been turning up, and so perhaps we've got something going on there as well. But the area is vast. You wouldn't think that within the shadow of Boston is such a vast wilderness area, but it is. So we're still working on that.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. Going back to the farmhouse that you mentioned back in the 18th century with the 6 generations and all that, is that currently still occupied? You said there's excavation. You could see from an aerial shots. Is that still occupied by the same family?
Oh, actually, no. The 1783 farmhouse is at Point 1. This is where we started in 05. And the Point 2, which is several miles away, is this farm where there's no farming. Okay?
Oh, I see. Okay, got it.
Yeah, so we don't know who lives there. It's an absentee. According to the land records, it's an absentee landowner, and we have one of our spies, if you will, did find the gate open one day when she was driving by, and there were she described them as 2 state vehicles in there, a truck and a car, and she works for the state. So I said, "Did you see the license plates?" And she said, "No." I said, "Well, they could be generic government vehicles, but in any case, we didn't find out any more on that day." But yeah, the place is still no farming going on. There is still some excavation going on. Many of the wires along the roads in the area have been buried. There are rather strange looking knots on trees. Not to get crazy, but when I was in the military, there were monitoring devices and sensors that looked like the knots of trees, and they looked kind of familiar. Even though I go back 35, 40 years, nevertheless, some of the technology has been improved upon. There were also sort of these strange things on utility poles in the middle of nowhere, and I have not been able to find out what they are. They have almost like dishes, and an engineer I knew suggested they were Wi-Fi receivers or transceivers, and but there were no houses around. What they would be doing, I don't know. So this is all an ongoing. Still we're in our 11th year now, and this is still ongoing.
Wow, interesting. It's that the big 1,000 square foot or so sheet of metal, what appears to be a sheet of metal, sounds very interesting to me.
Yeah, that's now been covered up by the new barn.
I see. Now, we have a question. I wanted to get to it, and we're right at the top of the hour here. So the listener that sent it in, and I wanted to make sure got to listen to this answer. And so the question is, do you think it's possible that alien intelligence has managed to escape the same timeline that us humans are governed by, i.e. one linear timeline between birth and death, where they found the ability to exist in more than one dimension using physics that we do not yet understand?
Well, I would give that a big yes, but I think it needs to be qualified. Linear time, as any physicist pretty much will tell you, does not really exist. Even Einstein suggested it was a function of our consciousness. I would go so far, and I'm not a physicist. My degree is in philosophy and theology, but nevertheless, I think that all of us together, perhaps the entire biosphere, creates reality, if you want to say it that way, and the illusion of time past to future, time passing, does not seem to be an objective one. It seems to be very subjective. And why do we experience it that way? Probably because we are not quite up to it. We're a very young species from an evolutionary standpoint. Dinosaurs were on the Earth till 60 million years ago, and they were on tens of billions of years before that. We've only been on the Earth, perhaps in any modern form, in maybe 2 million years. Okay, that's nothing. I think that given the multiverse scenario we have been discussing, and the certainly the ability, our shamans do it, the ability to use it to apparently be in different places at the same time, or to travel great distances, perhaps without even moving in any physical sense of the word, I think is sort of gives a yes answer to that question. But I think we have to realize that at least if this is correct, all so-called past and all so-called future are simultaneous, which leads to the conclusion essentially that in the multiverse, death is impossible in any meaningful way. Why? Because even for our physical bodies, because we are present in so many alternate states and alternate universes at the same time that we can't die. It's really impossible, because we are not just, again, the island theory is wrong. We're many different versions of ourselves, but in the end, we're pretty much all part of each other in a very concrete way. I always use the metaphor of a string of like Christmas lights or something. You have the different, a million different bulbs, but it's all the same life. It's all the same energy. It's all the same wire, so to speak. The poor metaphor that might be. So I think the answer is pretty much yes. And I think that if an alien civilization, the question arises, which alien civilization? There are perhaps many, of course, who may have access to us by means of alternate realities and the boundaries thereof, which are physicists refer to as brains, BRANES, or from membranes. Right. Mm-hmm. They may be coming back and forth, and something like the Roswell crash, if that's what it was, and the alien bodies, the deaths of alien crew members might be more of just a minor inconvenience than an actual death. So, or the leaf falling off. You are, or we are the whole tree. We're not just a leaf. So when your body in this reality, in this consciousness wears out, your leaf falls to the ground. It's really just a minor inconvenience, and you're living all sorts of other lives in parallel realities that maybe are really what our subconscious is here, and our life here is part of our subconscious everywhere and everywhere else. Wow. So yeah, that's a long way of saying yes to the question.
Yeah. We're on live. You just joined us. We're on live with Paul Eno, and anyone could call in if they have a question, or you can Skype also. The number is 603-967-4030. You can also Skype in at Marty Willis, MartyWillis, Skype username. Okay, so when you're talking about the linear time, how does the birth of the universe and the solar system and all that, how does all that fall into place when you're talking along this line?
Well, that's a very good question, Martin, and it's being addressed, as I understand it, by some of the people at CERN, the Large Hadron Collider, et cetera, which is probing some of the greatest subatomic mysteries that exist in the our universe anyway. There are some who believe that the Big Bang, as it is called, was the beginning of all this, and that ever since, all time, all space, etc., and that ever since you can create universes simply by making a choice. And I suppose this brings up the question: can infinity get bigger? I think it can. It's kind of difficult to conceive, but I think it's true. Now, if I were to take off my headset right now and smash it on the floor, I would not only have to buy a new headset and ruin the show, but I think we would have created another universe. Let me give you an example of this. The classic time paradox is, okay, suppose I build a time machine, which you really don't have to do to travel in time, actually, and you go back to the time of your great grandfather or grandmother or something like some ancestor, and you kill that ancestor. How could you ever be born in order to go back and kill your ancestor? Okay, that's not valid anymore. In other words, if you were to go back in time and kill your ancestor, you would simply create a new branch of the tree, and the indigenous peoples refer to this tree, another universe in which that ancestor had died. The one in which you were born would continue unhindered, because the ancestor never died in that universe. That's a very simple way of illustrating that. That's essentially how it works. So when you have someone, I suppose a loved one or somebody you don't even know, dies, sure, you go to their funeral, you bury them, et cetera, and you come back and a few years later, there they are. Well, you're simply seeing across a brain, B-R-A-N-E, to a universe where they never died. People ask us, in terms of dealing with the loss of a loved one, when my mother, we don't even use the word died, we use the word translated. It's a very ancient way of expressing that. When my mother translated in 2011, people would write into the show, very respectfully, but you could tell kind of behind the condolences stuff was, okay, wise guy, how do you deal with a loss? Now, you're telling us this for years, and how do you deal with it? Well, essentially, it's not a loss. It's not that she is still with us here. It's more that there are many, many worlds in which she never died, in which we are still with her. I have a better relationship with her now than I ever did. And this is shared in dreams and waking life, sometimes in meditation, where we may be where we are aware, I believe, of these other lives we are living, because it's all us. I think that when you meet people who are selfish jerks, it's because those are the worlds, the other lives in which they're most in touch. Or you get somebody like Mother Teresa, or someone who realizes the big secret that it's not about me, it's about us, and they become other-centered. I think they're in touch with, I suppose what the psychics might say, in more enlightened versions of themselves or higher selves or whatever. These are all terms, I think, that really can be explained by multiverse awareness. So I think essentially that's it. So the Big Bang may have been created there. The Big Bang has been called into question now, and it's a matter of some debate among cosmologists and astrophysicists about whether this actually occurred. So, and too, Martin, I'm sure that, and a lot of the listeners know, that in physics, when you have gaps that you can't explain, you will invent a theory and kind of hope that, and that's fine. I mean, because very often it turns out to be true, at least so we think, and hopefully to explain the phenomena at some future point.
That's kind of how religion works too.
Well, it depends on the religion. It's funny if you look back at the some of the ancient Christian mystics and writers from the really early periods, like 2nd, 3rd centuries. They essentially say all theology ends in silence, and in the end, it's really just you and God, which makes more sense to me than a lot of the baggage that has taken on over the years. So, but that's me.
How about that? So I think this is has been a really very interesting conversation, and I know we've covered all different types of topics. coming back to UFOs and what they may or may not be, you hear you hear all kinds of different theories, interdimensional, time travel. What you're talking about now is kind of new to me. How is that being, when you're talking about your ideas and your thoughts on this, how is that being received out there?
Well, much to my own surprise, actually quite well. As I say, I was just speaking at the Exeter conference. I know you've been there for some of my talks and at past conferences here and there, and it's always great to see you. And it's interesting that we are rarely invited to speak at the paranormal ghost type conferences, okay? Because really that's how we started out, and that's still kind of the center of what we do, the parasite thing and all. But I think it's because we're not, we're bad for business, because a lot of these people make a living at this based on 19th century ideas, and everybody buys it. And if we come in and start questioning those things, as I say, we're not good for business. Whereas the UFO people, who in my opinion, are in many cases head and shoulders intellectually above some of the ghost type people, I think that's been where we seem to be more welcome. I've had sort of real luminaries in the field compliment us on some of our ideas and say it's made them think. And I can't think of a higher compliment. These are people I really respect. Others, that's fine, whatever. And again, we could be wrong. We're the first to admit that. However, it's very well received seemingly in the UFO community. And I've noticed, especially in recent years, Martin, at the conferences we speak at, which are pretty much regional ones. We've never spoken at any big national MUFON things or anything. It's mostly Exeter, UFO Festival, Greater New England UFO Conference in Leominster, Mass., and now in Philadelphia next month for the MUFON group there, Pennsylvania. We are very well received, and we seem to be attracting to these conferences more people who are interested in the what we call the paranormal sort of picture, not just UFOs, not just ghosts, but people who are interested in the whole thing and are beginning to see that at least there's some sense in beginning to look at this as a whole phenomenon. And I think people will who think that may be beneficial will enjoy our book that's coming out in January. And funny, the foreword to the book was written by Stanton Friedman, so he who's the grandfather of ufology is a sympathizer in some ways.
How about that? Do you think when we talked earlier about you talked earlier about the 200 square mile or so triangle and this other triangle, do you think there's reasons for this geologically?
Well, I think that's part of the picture. Why do you have world intersects, if that's what it is, in certain places and not in others? Well, I think that they happen routinely around the world all the time. Like when you put your keys down on your table, you turn around, they're not there. Maybe there was a little overwash, and the keys are in some other table. We don't notice that. It's one of those things. However, when you have massive numbers of intersects in a certain area, you get these flaps. But we find very often, and we used to bring a soil engineer with us. People ask, "Oh, do you bring a psychic with you?" No, I bring a soil engineer and sometimes a geologist, right? And we would find that when you have high water tables and clay or sandy soils, which of course New England's full of that, we find that you have a greater possibility of some of these intersects taking place. We also find that when you have within 200 yards of an area high tension wires, really powerful electrical wires, this also will lend itself to assisting in the, I suppose, the thinning perhaps of the brains and more of a chance of paranormal phenomena taking place. That's very interesting because one of the first questions we ask, particularly in parasite cases, has your electric bill been very high, somebody in a house? And they'll almost invariably say, funny you should ask, yes, it's been to Pluto, and it shouldn't be. Well, the parasites, anyway, will feed upon the electrical system when they can't get you, And we often find, too, that these parasitical entities may be mistaken for aliens. I'm changing the subject, I guess, but excuse me, that's a subject that has come up with us rubbing elbows with the UFO community. I'm thinking particularly of
how does abductions fit into all this?
Well, that's a good question. I started wondering about this in 2003 when Bud Hopkins and I were speaking at a conference in West Virginia, and Bud, of course, being the late artist who was really a leader and expert in researching abduction phenomena through hypnosis and things of this kind. And we found a quiet corner, and he sat down and he had a photo album with him of various marks on the body that occur during abductions, or these people believe were abductions. And I said, my gosh, Bud, a lot of these look just like things I see in poltergeist cases where physical injuries occur. And we were about to kind of engage in a joint project to research this when he, of course, found his cancer really laid him low, and he really couldn't do much more work. A terrible tragedy. And so we began to see, well, maybe whether something is an alien or whether it's an abduction or whatever, or whether something is a parasite or a ghost, maybe depends on the context in which you experience these things. So, for example, if you are sitting in your living room and a wispy thing floats by, aha, a ghost. If you're out in your yard, maybe next to a field, and you see this wispy thing with maybe a ball of light over it, aha, an alien, or at least a UFO. And this has attracted the interest of of MUFON's abduction director of abduction research, experiencer research, Kathleen Marden, who has become a good friend, and she was at the Exeter conference too. And her colleague Denise Stoner, who was an experiencer as well, and also very much into other kinds of paranormal phenomena. And we consult now and then on cases they run into where the phenomena started with abductions and become quote-unquote demonic. Okay, or cases in which people are seeing UFOs and all of a sudden they have poltergeist activity taking place in their house. Here again, a perfect example of these crossover phenomena that may be indicative of some kind of flat barriers. Now, I for one have never found the abduction phenomenon very benign. Some people will tell you, and I heard a statistic from Travis Walton or someone very recently, in which about half of people who endure abductions or experience abductions feel that they are positive experiences. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now that I relate that I wonder sometimes if it's not the Patty Hearst syndrome. Terrorists abduct you, and you end up sympathizing with them.
Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah, precisely. That's exactly right. Tom Reed is an example too of some of this, and it's funny. Travis Walton told us, because when we interview him, we delight him by saying, let's talk about something other than your experience in the woods that time.
Yeah, I've done that too.
Yeah, exactly. As a matter of fact, I think aren't you the one who suggested it to us one time, and it really where he appreciates that. Anyway, we're going to have him on soon. Anyway, he was happy about we're talking about something else. But in any case, his experience seemed very, especially as it's portrayed in the book and the movie, Fire in the Sky. It's portrayed as very negative. Mm-hmm. He's shot by this beam, but now he said over the years he believes that they were trying to help him.
Right.
And they took him into the craft because he was accidentally came in contact with this defense field or whatever it was, and that's what knocked him back. In the energy field, and he was knocked backwards and that sort of thing. So, I mean, that may very well be true. But I think a lot of the people who may perceive abductions as positive may be going through this Stockholm syndrome, as you say, and think it's something positive later on. Other people have had horrific experiences, as you know, mm-hmm. and I just don't see anything really positive about taking you against your will and whatever they do, experimenting on you and breeding or whatever the heck it is. So that I just don't see it as a positive experience. It's never happened to me, as far as I know. But it's funny. This came up over the weekend. Somebody pointed out. You say you're not an experiencer, but you talk about all these dealing with these entities, bear-like beings in attics during ghost cases and this and that, and phantom deer who come out of the woods and disappear. Excuse me, and all sorts of things of this kind. You're an experiencer. So I guess I am, but I've never experienced an abduction that I know of.
Yeah. Going back to the intersex, as you call them, I believe that's what you call them. What about when someone has a one-off, a one sighting of, say, a UFO?
Well, if an intersect or an overwash is the cause of that sighting, then I think you have this happening all over the planet, probably all over the universe all the time. And I sometimes call them pass-throughs. You have whatever the cause may be, the geomagnetic phenomena in the area, this sort of thing. You may have an overwash take place, and it never happens again, at least not to that person in that place. And I think that can happen. I've talked to people who believe that that's been the case during some sightings. I remember one man in Connecticut telling me that he saw a very silent disc-shaped, a luminous disc, floating over the houses in his neighborhood. Several other people saw the same disc in different places, but nobody in his neighborhood saw it except himself. And he said he felt as though he said he felt it was a very personal experience, and he felt as though he was being tested. Now, isn't that an interesting way to put it? Yeah. So this, I think, can be very personal, and I think it may be intentional if they know how to manipulate the brains of parallel realities. Maybe that's the way they travel, or maybe that's what they use to manifest to one person at a time or a small group or whatever. So that's a possibility. Overwashes are intentional.
You hear repeatedly, of telepathic communication, and the topic is take better care of the planet. How would that fit into your theory?
Well, I think that the telepathic communication is, I think, across world boundaries. I think that when we have things of that kind occurring, it could be that we are in some parallel reality that's close to us with the person who's speaking to us, and taking it to its final conclusion. I think that we may be or may have an identity with whoever these people may be, or whoever these beings may be. I think that there is a great sort of back channel, underground connection between all of us, as I've mentioned, and I think that can be used for communication if you know how to do it. As I say, shamans do it all the time too. Now, that being said, there's one principle in the paranormal, throughout the paranormal, that I really stress, and that's that nothing is what it appears to be. Do not trust anything that tries to communicate with you. Don't use Ouija boards. Don't use this stuff. So whenever a message of that kind comes in, hopefully it's benign. Hopefully it's true, and we need to take better care of the planet, obviously. And I think we've been starting to do that. I think it's India and China needs to get off their tufts and do it too. Mm-hmm. But in any case, I think that we very often have things that happen like that, and we must test them. Now, I can't imagine anything negative in that message, but there are a lot of other messages that may come through that are really strange. And this may be an odd example to use, but I'm thinking of the Marian apparitions, like at Lourdes and Fatima. And I wonder what the sources of those really be. Now, the Roman Catholic Church accepts those as legitimate miracles, where these little peasant children or shepherd children were encountered a figure they believed was the Virgin Mary, and she communicated with them sometimes over long periods. But excuse me, if you look at those locations, the paranormal history of those locations, they were both known as fairy caves or fairy grottos. Since time immemorial, way back before Christianity, people would experience fairies, the goddess, various gods appearing there. Sometimes, in the case of Fatima, Bigfoot, or something that might be interpreted as such, and UFOs. So are these the centers of flap areas? what was it they were actually talking to. There's right near us, and I'm sure you've probably heard of this, Martin, because you're a New Englander too, the La Salette Shrine in Attleboro, Massachusetts.
Mm-mm.
It's okay. Well, it's the La Salette Fathers, Roman Catholic shrine to the Virgin Mary, who appeared to the founder of their order, and it's very famous every year for they have a couple of zillion Christmas lights, and everybody likes to go over and watch them turn on the lights every night. No, yeah, it's a nice place. However, when you look at the statue of the Virgin Mary as they depicted it upon the appearance to a bunch of children and ending up in the founding of this order of priests, it's Hera. It's the Greek goddess Hera. It is right down to the crown. And again, does it depend on the context? Does it depend on our religious beliefs, how we interpret these phenomena? And I think very often it does. The whole exorcism phenomenon, which I was involved with. My second seminary had a very sympathetic approach to my paranormal work, believe it or not. And I was working with a diocesan exorcist in this area in New York, and they were very good about this. And the exorcism of a demon, supposedly from a person that was quote unquote possessing, something was off. It just didn't strike me as what was really happening. So, again, depending on the context, but I would say be very careful what you listen to. Be very careful about who you think it is, because nothing in the paranormal is what it appears to be. Be very, very careful.
Wow. We've had some questions come up. One came up a while ago, and that is, what are your thoughts on when the topic of ancient aliens comes up?
Well, that's a very good question, and the first chapter of our new book has to deal with that. The ancient aliens, sure. I mean, why wouldn't someone perhaps come from another planet and maybe influence us, bother us, whatever? But if you look at it from this multiverse perspective, I think that it may add new layers to this whole affair. There does seem to be overwhelming evidence that somebody messed with our genetics, because when the human genome was mapped in the early, it was 2002, 2003, the thing was that there were 223 genes found that shouldn't be there, if our understanding of evolution of life on Earth is correct. Mm-hmm. And they really couldn't explain it, except they came up with this, again, one of these stopgap theories that there was some kind of, quote, horizontal transfer from bacteria, unquote, whatever that means. So I think that we may have had someone who was rather human, maybe stumbling or deliberately coming through a world boundary for perhaps some time that to us, even to us, might be the future. Sounds kind of goofy, but the evidence seems to be overwhelming. When I was researching that book and my previous book, Turning Home, there was archaeological evidence that is really not very well known. There is the evidence of aurochs who disappeared thousands of years ago. These are bovines, used to roam the plains of Central Asia, that apparently were brought down by gunfire. There is a Neanderthal skull found in really deep strata, and it has a high-velocity rifle hole right through it. There was evidence of root canals being done thousands of years ago, and all this business. Now, I think we had very sophisticated medicine in the ancient world, but we didn't have high-velocity rifles. So this kind of thing is kind of really strange. There was evidence too of from folklore and I'm thinking too not only of Genesis, the book of Genesis in the Bible, but also the Atrahasis of the Akkadians and the Karsag epics of the Babylonians. And you've got really the same story being told in different ways. Now, I made it a point to go and learn Hebrew, which is not taught in the seminary, really should be, so I could read Genesis in the original. Okay, now I'm kind of rusty today, but I remember what I read. The trouble with ancient Hebrew was that it not only had no vowels, but modern Hebrew has vowel marks, but the words were run together. So how you translate it really depends on how what you believe. But in the beginning was the Word. No, I'm sorry. That's the Gospel of John. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay. Now, that's how it translates into English, and all the English translations of the Bible, at least, are terrible. But if you read in the Hebrew, you could read it this way, that when it began, the shining ones stood upon the heights, or floated on the heights, and looked down upon the highlands and the lowlands. Now, what the hey is that? The most ancient word for God in the Old Testament is Elohim, which is a feminine word, plural feminine word with a masculine feminine word with a masculine plural ending. There's no word like it in any Semitic language, and it translates the shining ones, plural. Now, who the hey were the shining ones, right? So this gets into a whole can of worms here about possible intrusions from not maybe another planet, but also probably from I think maybe rather than that from across the boundaries of parallel worlds. Now, why would I think that? First of all, you've got them intermarrying with human women. Now, you can't do that unless your DNA is virtually the same, and having children by these women. Or unless you have fantastic and stunning technology for gene splitting, okay? Now, from the Atrahasis and all these other documents, it appears that there was an agricultural colony, which translates in the Bible to the Garden of Eden, and I tend to think this was centered in the Kadisha Valley of Lebanon. And I consulted with some scholars on this, and that valley actually has a village called Ekden, almost spelled the same as we would spell Eden, which is fantastically ancient. And there is evidence of really way back farming, irrigation canals, and some agricultural technology that's pretty bizarre. And it really fits the bill of all this. It was known from time out of mind as the Holy Valley, and Christian monks and Muslims of the Sufi sect came to live there, and interestingly enough, helped each other. And the mountains around this valley were commonly known from folklore as being the dwelling of gods. There's a very interesting book of Enoch, which was not included in the Christian Bible because I thought it was too weird. But Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah and great-grandson of Adam, was one of these sort of a go-between between the Most High. All three documents call he, she, it, or them the Most High, who had a wife. Even Yahweh had a wife. Even the Hebrew God early on had a female counterpart known as the Shekinah. And stop me if this gets boring. And what they did was essentially an agricultural colony, and Enoch was sort of a pet of these Elohim or Anunnaki, whatever, depending on the document you're talking about. And he would be taken by in a craft that amounts to what we would call a UFO, up to either an island in the sky, which is what one of the documents calls it, or to a very high mountain where the Most High lived. And he was a sort of a go-between. The Atrahasis has them, and the Karsak epics have them taking blood and saliva from one of their own and changing the nature of the people who were native to this area, who, of course, were changed into modern humans, apparently, by this, so that they could be used as laborers. This is apparently what happens if you cut through the religious imagery and a lot of the other stuff that's in this. This is DNA work we're talking about. We're talking about genetic manipulation here, and particularly in the Karsag epics, this is spelled out. It says they took the saliva and blood, prime DNA sources, and they manipulated the nature of the native population. So Again, I mean, if this is true, we're looking at ancient aliens on steroids here. Okay. There is evidence later on that all of a sudden Babylonian civilization and Sumerian civilization, I should say, sprang seemingly out of nowhere after this in the Middle East, in the Fertile Crescent, that area there that's well known even today, and that these people were like bean farmers one year, and then the next year they were lawyers, doctors, and teachers. Right out of, and they had a written business language. Now, certainly there was civilization in China and India as well that was advanced for the time. But these were the first people, the Sumerians, to develop really extensive commerce and writing and the cuneiform, this sort of thing, in that way. All of a sudden, this was in the 1930s. A guy named Langdon, not the guy from the Brown movies, whatever, I can't remember the names of the whatever. It's not him, the symbol expert. This was a fellow who was an archaeologist, and he said this is going to be hard to believe, but his finding was that people started out as monotheists. In other words, worshippers of one god, or like a family of gods, like this Yahweh and the Shekinah, or Karsag and Nin Karsag, whatever names they were like a family or three, like a trinity almost, with us, the human race, being the child. And if what I just said was correct, really happened, then that we're the child literally. And then all of a sudden, as the Sumerians get established, all of a sudden, in a short time, you have thousands, in their case, up to about 5,000 gods, demigods, demons, spirits, and all this stuff. Well, how did that happen? Well, I think there might have been another incursion that had nothing to do with any incursion by people with technology from some other time or place, by parasites, perhaps. And these parasites, as I said, being the folklore basis of our belief in demons, evil spirits, even vampires, because the ancient Sumerian word for this translates as life-sucking ghosts, and that's what they do. They're not, they're perfectly, they're life forms that will literally drain us of energy. And I think they're still active and were then, and I think that how do you do that beyond a family? Well, they're very intelligent. Maybe you convince the king that you're a god and do as I say or else. And how else would you have people worshiping these unloving monster things that demanded human sacrifice and things of this kind? I think people perhaps thought they had no choice. How much sustenance could these things get from a whole tribe or nation? How much sustenance could they get from human sacrifice, from war? Wow. And I think that this may be a possible, more ancient aliens of a kind we really haven't imagined. But I think that this was global. I think that the ancient aliens may have come from another planet, or there are theories about Nibiru and all these other planets within the solar system. That's entirely possible. But I think we need to consider as well incursions from other parts of the multiverse of people very much like ourselves.
Now, along these lines, someone also asked, again, we're a little bit off topic, but it's pretty fascinating to me, and that is, what are your thoughts on giants, written through biblical times?
Well, that's kind of interesting. Jason Jarrell has been on our show, and we've talked about this twice already. And the giants thing is interesting. The term in the Old Testament in Genesis is the Nephilim. These were giants who intermarried with human women. They're sometimes equated with the Anunnaki or with being among the Elohim, these shining ones. And they took to themselves human women and had children by them. And these women supposedly became the great heroes of the men of renown, is how it's translated into English generally. And I'm often wondering, well, maybe these became the gods upon whom the later more beneficent ones were understood, like Apollo and Jupiter and the Greeks and the Romans and these guys, maybe the Egyptians, Isis, certainly the beloved of the Mediterranean peoples, and certainly even beloved today, who kind of came into Christianity maybe as a form of the Virgin Mary, because the people would not let her go. They loved her so much. So these are all the possibilities. Giants, you have to remember, people I often wonder were of a smaller stature than they are today.
Mm-hmm.
And I often wonder if you were well, I don't know. So you think of people like some basketball players today, or big guys, going back and rubbing elbows with these people, they would be considered giants. Okay. Now, Jason says that there's evidence of really giant people, from the American remote past. But be that as it may, I think that they may have been perhaps what we would consider more like modern people, whoever was doing these incursions, if that's what happened, and that's why they were considered giants. Or they may have just been a very large race, so we don't know. As we say, all things that are possible, all things we can imagine, exist somewhere or someone in the multiverse, if this is true, and that's why we can imagine it. We often end our Halloween show. The station insists we do a Halloween show every year, and we often end with the idea that the Great Pumpkin, Linus and the Peanuts comic strips always get in trouble with the Great Pumpkin, and we said that unless at some place at some time in the multiverse such a creature did not exist, Schultz would never have been able to imagine it, and it never would have gotten to the comic strip. So somewhere or somewhere there must be giants, and somewhere or somewhere they made incursions into our remote past, or one of our remote pasts, and that would probably explain that. So anything is possible and likely in the multiverse.
Wow. Now I mentioned earlier that we'd at this we've got about 15, 17 minutes, something like that left. That we'd talk a little bit about Rendlesham Forest. Now, after all you have said about these intersects and all that, how do you think Rendlesham Forest? I know pardon me, you and Ben spent some time there. Let's talk about that.
Well, the first thing we did, Martin, before we went, and that was in 2012, was to look up things that might indicate if this is a flap area or not, because we find these things are usually the tip of the iceberg. Now, certainly in Rendlesham Forest in 1980, there were December of 80, there were these landings and possible interaction and witnessed by all kinds of Air Force personnel, including high-ranking officers. Well, similar things are still witnessed there. And we made it a point to talk, which nobody seems to an awful lot, talk with a lot of the local people who were there at the time. And matter of fact, we had a meeting at a local hotel, which we lectured about our theories. And we were like an hour, 2 hours over, because the place was standing room only, and people were relating experiences that had happened to them at the time and that still happened there. One of the main things we found before we went there was to look up other well-known phenomena, or at least bizarre phenomena that occurred in that area. And we found a bunch. A disappearing cyclist, all sorts of black dog appearances. That's the Brits seem to like these black dogs. The Aldeburgh Sky Battle of 1642, where people actually stood on the ground and watched these ships fighting each other in the air. 1916, a UFO appearance with the inhabitants of the crew or whatever is looking down at the people, and you name it, it's gone on around there. And of course, the local Wiccan population, for generations, has had ceremonies in this forest and considers it a place of great power. And, of course, so the tip of the iceberg, it became known, of course, because the Air Force happened to experience it, and the whole possibility of nukes on the base and the craft with the beams and the whole business. We all know that story. So that's essentially what we discovered about that area, and we're still in touch with some of the local population. One of the things that people feel happens to them there was happening long before our good friend Jim Peniston came into the forest in 1980 and had his binary code downloads, as he today describes them. Those codes, in his belief, came from someone or some people from the future and indicated geographical coordinates of certain important places on the Earth, and that has only recently been figured out by some experts in binary codes. Other people feel that they have been there and have very definitely had binary codes downloaded to them. And this may indicate that it wasn't necessarily from the ship Peniston was touching at the time. Probably was, if all that happened as he describes. But seems to be an intersect place where those things could be coming from someone in some parallel reality affecting the people who were there. We knew no sooner. Our first trip there was at night with Larry Warren, one of the original witnesses, Brenda Butler, and Beverly Plumridge, who are experiencers there too, and also Gordy Goodger, who's the promoter of a lot of the Rendlesham lectures and things by the witnesses every few years, and a dog named Fudge. Well, we no sooner got out of the cars and into the parking lot when Ben collapsed, as he sometimes does, and everyone was concerned. He said, "Don't touch him. It's a shaman thing. Don't touch him." But as soon as that happened, he began. There were dogs howling up and down the road, and Fudge himself started to whine. Okay, so Ben came to after about 5 minutes. There were some. He never remembers that this happens, but there are certain things that he remembers from what he hears during these things. So we made it up to Eastgate, took some photographs. Brenda has some remarkable photographs. We took some photographs and got all kinds of bizarre things, cloud-like phenomena, strange lights. So it is, we believe, a flap area and the center of a flap area as well. Any military involvement? Well, you had the whole forest straddled by two different air bases that dated back to World War II. And Larry Warren, in describing his experiences there, will talk about an underground facility where drugs were administered and other debriefings occurred to the people who were on the security teams that went into the forest that night. So, I mean, who knows? But in our opinion, it is definitely the tip of an iceberg and certainly a flap area.
Yeah, absolutely. And so these things are ongoing. I have heard that. I actually spoke with Charles Halt a while back, and he said he believed also that they were continuing going on. I think that's how long did you actually visit there?
Well, we were only there for 2 days.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. I wish it could have been longer. And we are going back, but we're in constant touch now with the people we talk to in the area, and that. When we spoke that night, that was really amazing with the things people were saying. People were falling over each other to tell us things that had happened to them there. And these are all, local business people and feet on the ground types from an English village that, has a long history and also a long history of the paranormal.
Would you say that that's possible, that is also a triangular area that these things are happening in?
Yeah, I think so. As a matter of fact, if you consider the two former airfields, it even forms a triangle, And so I think, again, we may have just another repeat of what we see in the other flap areas, the military possibly researching. And the question arises, why wouldn't they, particularly in a place like Rendlesham, well, that's kind of out of the way. But in a place like Litchfield, Connecticut, which is within 100 miles of New York City, why wouldn't they be doing this research in the desert someplace where nobody can see them? Well, because they have to go where the intersects are. And I think that they have that's essentially the reason for the military activity at that point.
And would you say, when you're talking about all these people came forward in the area, when you say the area, does that encompass, it's kind of rural there, does that encompass a kind of a large mass with villages?
Yes, I'd say probably 100 square miles. I mean, we were in Woodbridge there, which is not too far from the forest, but people came from Norwich and other areas around that part of Suffolk, adjacent to the North Sea. And that was, I'd say, probably encompassing an area about maybe 100 square miles. Because some of the phenomena had occurred within, that I referred to earlier, had occurred within 20 miles. The farthest was 40 miles away. So the whole area of, the lighthouse that's in question and all these vicinities, I'd say probably about 100 square miles, if that.
So what would you say to these projects that are going on now that are trying to detect UFOs and get, data from them? For instance, there's UFO Talk, Mark D'Antonio, I know you know him.
He's a dear friend. Yep.
Yeah, he's a great guy. And also him and Doug Trumbull, and as well as the other UFO data, UFO detection and tracking. Do you think they're wasting their time trying to get data from these sightings?
No. Well, I'm not really competent to say whether they are or not. I don't think so. I mean, any attempt to gain knowledge and to gain information is never a waste of time, in my opinion. I think if you narrow your concepts to just what we understand, I think you may be inhibiting the ability to gain knowledge from. In other words, I think that to assume, again, it's these assumptions that'll get you every time, to assume that these craft are, nuts and bolts, or that they're not nuts and bolts in every case, is a mistake. I think that perhaps the biggest mistake might be to assume that the occupants of the craft have the same motivations we do, and that they would consider us as equals is not only incorrect, I think it might be a very serious error, dangerous one. I mean, it's just that, even Stan Friedman has put it this way, how come they don't circle around, the Super Bowl and say, here we are? And Stan would say, well, we're essentially tribal
warfare.
Warfare. I can't quite remember.
I know what you mean. I heard him say it. A primitive race whose primary activity is tribal warfare. That's right. Yeah.
And he's right. And why would they want to talk to us? So I mean, there's that, and there's the idea that they may be so alien to us that that within our paradigm we don't have the ability to really understand what their motivations are, what they're doing. What would the motivations of a totally alien race be? I've heard it said, I've said it, that probably survival. And if you don't exist, then what's the point? However, that with the multiverse concept as we've outlined it, with death having no real meaning, even physically, the survival thing might not be a consideration, even if you understand that and can use the multiverse in that way, as they apparently can, wherever they may be. I think all bets are off, but I think any attempt to gain knowledge or data, I mean, that's fine. But again, what does it mean? Where does it come from? And what are you going to do with it? One
last question was up on the message board, and that is, what do you think about the Phoenix Lights? What happened is, I've heard that, in some part of that area, there's still sightings that show up, but it's not like all the time. It's like, once a year, once every other year, or something like that.
Well, I think Phoenix Lights are very interesting. We did a lot of interviews on that in our own show, and the questioner might be intrigued by the fact that I saw the Phoenix Lights myself from an airplane.
Really?
Yes, in 2006. I believe it was 2006. Ben and I were on the way to San Diego to do a program there, and we were flying over Phoenix in the middle of one of those red-eye flights. I don't think anybody else was awake on the plane. Ben was asleep. You fly today, you're lucky you get on the same plane, never mind the same seat. And Ben was over on the other side of the plane, sound asleep. And I happened to be looking out the window, and I could see Phoenix. And sure enough, there were these line of lights, 4 actually. And I spent a total of 12 years in the military, albeit in reserve capacity, but I did a lot of active duty. I know what a flare looks like. And these were apparently separate objects. It's difficult to really tell the altitude of these things, especially when you're at 33,000. I would suspect these were between 10 to 15,000 feet. That would be my estimate. One of them left. Okay, kind of sank into the background. Another one, there were 2 that did that, and there were 2 left there. One seemed to descend to the ground or toward the ground, and again, this is all me whizzing by, in a commercial aircraft. So from what I could see, they were doing something between Phoenix and the Western Mountains, and they apparently were operating independently and were doing different things, and it did not look like flares to me. And I wondered, what am I seeing exactly? Sure enough, we got to the next day to San Diego, and the paper said that they had seen the Phoenix Lights the night before. So I felt rather honored at that.
Good timing.
Yeah, talk about good timing. Yeah. I'd love to have been listening in on the cockpit chatter at the time, or any kind of communication. But
that's a whole nother topic to get into at some point. Airlines and pilots and their limitations about talking about what they see.
We have several in our spy network who will not. We know their names, but we can't say. One is in Europe.
I'm interested about the spy network. I should get one of those.
You should be one of our spies.
Yeah. All right. So we're coming toward the end of the show. Again, why don't you tell the listener? A couple of people have written on the message board that they're going to be listening to your show. So can you fill them in one more time? How to catch that?
Sure. If they go to behindtheparanormal.com, there are full instructions right there on the main page. It's WOON 1240 AM in the Boston, Providence, Worcester triangle, if I may use the term. And you can also get the thing on the website of the station, which is onworldwide.com. It's 12 to 1. Eastern time every Sunday. And if you have a device that you can't do either of the things I just mentioned, you'll want to use I suggest the Simple Radio app by Streema, Streema, which seems to work very well. Just search for WOON 1240 at the time of the show.
And if you're going on a long drive, or if you're going on a long flight and you want to listen to podcasts, you can actually catch. Did you happen to say you have 600 shows?
There are over 600 shows and podcasts, including 16 hours on the Rendlesham case with the original witnesses, and that's at behindtheparanormal.com, and they're all free.
Wow, how about that? And I feel like my 217 shows is a lot, and then I hear you have 600. That's amazing. How long ago? We're just about at the end here, but we have just about a minute or so. How long ago did you start broadcasting?
It was 2008. On a Phoenix internet station. Then CBS picked us up for 4.5 years in 4 cities.
Oh, that's right.
That was, And then in 2009, we started on ON 1240 and been there ever since.
Right. And actually, I got to tell you, I listened to your very first show, and right out of the gate, you did a wonderful job. So I highly recommend anyone that's listening, if you want to follow both Paul and Ben on the show. It's very interesting topics they touch on. And give my best to Ben, if you would.
I will. I'll be happy to, Martin. Thank you for the kind words.
Yes. All right. So thanks a lot, and I'm sure we'll be talking soon.
Very good.
All right. Take care. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening. I thought it was an interesting guest. I have a couple people to thank. First of all, Alejandro Rojas for helping me out with the news. Our guest, of course. Peggy Shunning for managing the Facebook page, and also Carrie Lloyd Whitehouse for the music. Next week, we have another interesting guest, almost along the same lines, Joshua P. Warren. But we are going to be talking about UFOs, more or less, in that show. I know on tonight's show we touched on all different subjects. I still thought it was fascinating, and I hope you did too. And we will see you here next week. Remember to keep your eyes to the sky.